tea, and that's gonna be okay.
Hello, Elena. Boy, do you look good today. Twinkling, twinkling.
Very much. You look good too, Dan. I'm
I
so glad we had this
trim my beard
chat.
a little.
Oh, you're more tan than me.
Yeah, getting younger. Well, it's pretty sunny down here, whereas up in Ireland,
No,
no.
it doesn't.
Yeah, it's been hot. We're lucky. We have mountain river water right here. It's ice cold. Wim Hof getting the cold water. Doing good.
The cold water in my place falls from the skies
That's good.
every single day. So
So
anyway,
how this conversation started was Elena and I were sitting at the Tours for France conference chatting about fun stuff, and it was wonderful. And we decided, well, look, we were presenting to the French audience there, but I had this wonderful slideshow, and there should be a version for, and what a better venue for that sharing than Elena's fabulous audience. Really good.
yes, yes, absolutely. And it was a delight to get to meet you in real life, Dan. And that was really good. And we had so much fun in the Rencontre Galactique conference in Tours. And
And
yeah,
the
it's
way
great.
that people, I mean, it's hard to say this actually, but people kind of worship Elena. And well, they should. and,
No.
and, and she doesn't want to be. But I mean, obviously she was the hero, and that's good. And the point that we want to make here is that the bravery of Elena in, leading with an ambassador relationship for the Federation, et cetera, it's a difficult to lead in that way. And Elena deserves that honor. It's a wonderful thing. But what my concern here is that then let's put the best science we have behind Elena's narrative. That's part of the agenda here, really, because she deserves it and needs that support. And plus,
Wow.
well, plus so many of Elena's wonderful pieces of the narrative, like the propulsion and the stargates and the portals and the energy and the med beds, we actually have the serious electrical engineering physics. So not only can we make that shareable, but it makes a solid support. And I do mean serious electrical engineering. You know that our Planckfire.com, quote unquote, theory of gravity, that implosive conjugate fractal charge compression not only causes gravity in consciousness, but once you get a clue about that, literally things like when Jean-Charles Moyen made these fractal golden ratio brainwaves and, did the portal thing with witnesses, suddenly it's not a mystery. We're no longer woo-woos. We are scientists. It's better that way.
Yes, and it was such a chance. I think it's the universe that put that together, that you, Patrick Botte, and Jean-Charles could connect together, because with science, and I mean physical scientific devices, and you could measure
Yeah.
Jean-Charles' brain wave and corroborate and bring scientific proof to his claims. And that is mind-blowing. It's a
And
that's
his brainwaves
necessary
were
for
off the
everyone.
chart, quite literally. In fact, Patrick almost fell off his chair when he saw John Charles's brainwaves. He had to turn the gain down. But that is the point. So that, John Charles came to us and said, like to measure. And we said, well, you need to be ambitious, because you can buy the little Muse headset, flameinmind.com, measure your brainwaves. But he did very, very diligently and well, and made an incredible recording. And that's how the whole process at the conference started, when we wanted to really present that science. And that's also in this slideshow. And so maybe I'll go ahead and see if let's share screen, shall I? Keynote
Yes.
Tours talk. So let's see if this works. So can you see my
Yes, it's
yes.
working.
So I, after the conference and chatting with you, at the end of the conference, you talked about Enki saying, the destiny of the humankind lie in the twinkling of millions of stars. Wasn't that the?
That's beautiful.
It was incredibly powerful. My hair's standing up right now thinking about that moment. And of course, I had to meditate on what that meant in the twinkling of stars. And that's actually the climax of this presentation, that when the DNA does implode, and, you know, Osiris Enki was a sun god, what that means is literally we present the measurements of what happened to the solar flares when a million children sang at the same time. Yes, the twinkling of stars is our destiny, and electrical engineers can talk about that. And Adam Kadmon, well, you know, Adam Kadmon, we think means, you know, is Enki's intent for a gene pool that could bend stars. But what that means, you know, physically, you know, we talk about 5, 7, 12 braid strand in DNA, but it actually has to do with the recursive implosive folding induced by the kind of bliss produced by John Charles's brainwaves, which literally implodes the DNA. And at the longitudinal node at center, we're going to talk about that. That's actually where you know, the story is, if Osiris didn't inhabit the sun, the Nile wouldn't flood on time. Well, where's the physics? And that's where we're going with this talk anyway. So this is a reprise of the conference. Also, we're going to playfully talk about Elena's fun question about how the cities float. Was it Saturn or Jupiter?
Saturn. Yes, that's great to talk about that, and I look forward to.
Yeah, there's basically, you know, insect skeletons, implosive capacitance. If you walk over a hill of those, you float. Well, what is that implosive? You know, it's called cavity structure effect. We'll show you. Anyway, so the secrets of impulse versus warp propulsion, the secrets of longitudinal waves in crystal healing. You know, I had a lot of fun with Marcel Vogel, along with Dan Willis, and we have some slides about that in here too. And the secrets of EEG, the deep emotional programming and braiding of DNA to implosion, ensouling, and teleporting. I remember when Elena answered a question in one of her recent seminars, and somebody said, well, they asked Elena, you know, are the ETs going to give us the gift of 12 strands in our DNA? And Elena, I think, answered very correctly. She said, no, you're going to do that for yourself.
Yes. Oh, that's the only way it can work.
And so we present the physics of how, if you choose coherent emotion, literally coherent heart brain, that implodes your DNA, and we'll see exactly where the 12 strands come from. Anyway, so then this is the little movie here about
revolve golden mean ratio sine waves, and the feeling becomes alive.
Visualizing this implosive charge collapse, cause of gravity, consciousness, and action at a distance, connecting to the array. And that's this concept here is the nodes of this compression become an array, and we're going to talk about it. So this was the intro slide in tours. Background about me, electrical engineer. Our main websites, therify.net, flameandmind.com, imploder.com. And the theme of the conference there was understanding what Jean-Charles Moyen did when he had implosion in his brainwaves, and literally the physics of how a teleport happens. And this, we're calling that charge collapse, which basically is the implosion in John Charles' case in the brainwaves that creates a node at the centripetal moment. We're going to look at John Charles' brainwaves in a moment. Remember, I think, do you remember, Elena, when John Charles said, well, just before I would teleport, my right eye would see where I was, and my left eye would see where I was going.
Yes, I think it was a great clue, and it was it always did that every time it teleported.
Yes.
So that is fascinating, Dan.
Yeah, that's such a, well, now we think we know the right hemisphere and left hemisphere act as a cone vortex of plasma charge between them, and the node at the compression center point, which is part of a longitudinal array, literally the nodes in a big hologram. And when you compress, accelerate enough, you can inhabit that bigger array and be distributed. That's, and we're going to show more about that mystery anyway. So this was my new book on this implosive charge collapse and how the array works. It's called plancfire.com, and it's already the #1 new release in wave mechanics in Amazon. And basically, we're saying that the cause of gravity and consciousness and teleportation, in John Charles' case, is this implosion of charge, perfected charge collapse. And it's actually well known and agreed that charge collapse causes gravity and consciousness. The new information is what causes charge collapse. So this is my 5 books on Amazon Kindle. You'll see that, and that's the newest one. So this is our little animation. It'll work here, yeah. So basically, if you take Planck times golden ratio multiples, you get this phase conjugate fractal implosion of charge, and that's perfecting charge collapse. Remember, so much of physics has already agreed that charge collapse is the mechanism of consciousness and gravity. The mystery has always been the cause of charge collapse. So the other part of that is when this collapse occurs, and you're going to see there's kind of like pine cones kissing noses. And at the compression center point, like in John Charles, the center between the eyes, there's what's called a coherent longitudinal node, sometimes called scalar. And that's part of an array or a nest, a fractal nest of those nodes, including the sacred sites of Earth in a dodecacosa array. And what causes that connection to that center, that centripetal force, is something called a phase conjugate pump wave, which is actually very simple to visualize. Visualize a caduceus. Here we see that we take that equation, Planck. Planck is the musical key signature of every wave physics has ever measured in length and time. And you simply multiply by whole number multiples of golden ratio, fractality perfected. And you get this symbol of Hermes Ningishita, the caduceus.
Question, Dan, before you go forward. So would you say that this node of compression between the two hemispheres where they are in perfect attunement is the pineal gland, is located there?
It is most likely the most powerful part of the array is at or very near the pineal. I have personally experienced literally a burning in the pineal many times with Kundalini experience. So I would say it's very likely, yes, actually, in the sense of pining away. It's actually the harnessing of the process of yearning. And where the Sufis talk about that, also in that same center of yearning relates to center of gravity, and how Sufis teach you to feel the center of gravity of your body and the earth and then the sun. And it's a series of slingshots into bigger and bigger longitudinal array. Anyway, so the point we were making here was just that, that equation for golden ratio times Planck produces the blue harmonics there, 2.78, 4.5. And below, you see the actual Schumann harmonics, meaning Enki Hermes Thoth went to a lot of trouble to rearrange the orbital dynamics of the Earth, where the wavelength of the speed of light divides into circumference, to produce the dominant Schumann harmonic, 7.83 hertz, in order that the Earth could be naturally a phase conjugate pump wave, implosive, why Gaia is negentropic. And we're going to see that that exact same literal frequency cascade is precisely the brain waves that make bliss and stargates. So this, we're not going to present the detailed physics here too much. We won't bore you, but this is the details from the book. You see, you take that key equation, Planck times golden ratio integer multiples, and you get exact DNA codon turn height to width. You get the exact two frequencies of photosynthesis. Only two narrow bands make photosynthesis. It's phase conjugate and fractal. You get ADP, the most important molecule dimension. You get three exact hydrogen radii. You get the definition of all sacred dimension, the British foot, for example, because charge collapse defines the sacred, because that embedding makes the connection, you see. You get the Schumann harmonics, the brainwave harmonics, the Mayer wave, the Venus year, Earth year, galactic year, precessional year. It's fun. Everything that is negentropic. And this is just showing some of how we actually calculate that. So here's the harmonics of that equation. Look here, these are the actual low frequencies here, which are the Schumann harmonics by equation, implosive phase conjugate pump wave, and the brainwave harmonics that make bliss, and the infrasound that makes the perfect bliss binaural beat, flameinmind.com, and how we drive therify.net. So we're going to stop with the detailed physics here shortly, because we don't want people's eyes to glaze over. But just to say, there is serious physics here. This is exactly, precisely 3 hydrogen radii, Planck times golden ratio. This is not a coincidence. No, this is a smoking gun. The way hydrogen, the reason hydrogen makes gravity is because it is fractal and tuned to Planck, because those wavelengths phase lock and conjugate, add and multiply, and the compression becomes acceleration of phase velocity towards center. And that caused acceleration of charge towards center is named the gravity.
Yes. I may comment here that in the history of the genetic manipulations of humanity, and Lille and his own teams of geneticists had broken the hydrogen bonds in the DNA for the humans to disconnect with their capacities, their true potential. So there was
That's
really makes
powerful.
sense.
Yeah, very powerful. And we're going to see in the graphics coming up that the center bond of every DNA codon rung is hydrogen. This pure fractal, that's the zipper. That's the lightning bolt up the center of DNA. And that's how it implodes, makes bliss, and bends stars and twinkles. And so these are some of our publications in the physics journal, Compression, the Hydrogen and Phase Conjugation, and the Cause of Gravity. And you'll see that planckfire.com. So this is just, for the lay person thinking about, how is it that golden ratio, self-similarity perfected is fractality perfected phase conjugation? Here's the Mandelbrot set. And if you see at the bottom, the actual golden ratio in the Mandelbrot set. So the Mandelbrot set is profoundly based on golden ratio as well, which is fractality classically. So the Schumann harmonics, hydrogen, DNA, everything's based on golden ratio, and everything negentropic is predicted by golden ratio times Planck. And later we're going to see how that access to the black hole of perfected compression is not only a description of bliss and how Jean-Charles did the teleport, but literally the required black hole to enable successful death. We talked about that at the conference some too. Yeah. It's really true. Ray Moody famously proved that the death visions are electrically contagious because successful death is a black hole, because you need compression to get into that array, which has been called communion of saints, collective unconscious, heaven, plains of Sharon, Champs-Élysées. So here we're just showing this is the connection to the brain waves, alpha, beta, theta, and gamma, actually to literally exactly the chart of the Schumann harmonics. So the Earth is having bliss, or are you having bliss? Oh, it's both. So this implosion then leads us up to the discussion about Jean-Charles. So, and as Elena and I just were talking about, so these are the actual brain waves Jean-Charles made. Maybe I'll just blow this up a little bit here. This is the French, and yeah, here's a little bit bigger. So you see the alpha in green. It's about, in Jean-Charles' case, it's about 8 to 10 hertz, a little higher. And the alpha frequencies of your brainwave is the platform upon which the caduceus implosive cascade is built. So when you start with the alpha in green, then the blue lines are golden ratio harmonics to that alpha. The pink lines are octave harmonics to that alpha. And in this case, you can't really see it here because we had to turn the gain down, but the amplitude is huge. The amount of his alpha was like off the charts. And what that octave and golden ratio is doing is actually building this nest. There's a tetracube, octa in center, and dodecacosa outside. So you're literally making this implosion nest inside your head. You've learned, obviously Jean-Charles intuitively, and I can make 5 harmonics in golden ratio, but I don't quite get to the gamma. So I don't get stargates, but I do get bliss. And actually, I do get clairaudience, but I don't get much clairvoyance in my case. And so my limitation is, in part, that gamma, sometimes called Tibetan gamma. And the reason is clear, because that 44 hertz or thereabouts gives you the highest frequency of leverage to implode those brain waves with more compression at the center point. So clearly the gamma is a very important part of that conversation. Just to give the background here, how we learned to measure Jean-Charles we were teaching children to see without their eyes, flameinmind.com, our brainwave tech. And, the children, they all tell the same story. They go into this trance. It's a state of relaxation. They visualize themselves in beautiful nature. The body flips an electrical switch and you get fractal and implode. If you even imagine nature, your body decides to implode. It's very cool. So anywho, then all the children tell the same story. That what they see blindfolded is a tube, a vortex, a tunnel form inside their head. All the children tell the same story. Flameandmind.com, you can see the films. It's amazing. So that vortex tube inside their head becomes an eyeball if they develop the inner muscles to squeeze, literally implode that. Now, John Charles's frequency was the same as these kids who learn the trance. There's thousands of kids all over the planet doing this, seeing without their eyes by going into this bliss trance. It's very well known and common. It's taught in dozens of countries. But the physics is instructive here. The inner muscle to squeeze that plasma vortex to a point. That's called the phase conjugate cause of perception, because that now tells you not only how the kids see without their eyes. And remember, those kids consistently start also seeing their ancestors. Oops. It's a scream. In the West, the parents were freaked out. In the East, they took it. That was no problem. But it's actually the physics of clairvoyance, which is coherence into the longitudinal array. And we're going to see in a moment, it's also the physics of lucid dreaming, as well as Stargate. So connecting to that longitudinal array is everything. So that is the physics of consciousness. Now we know that plasma donut, it's literally, we've talked about this before, but that plasma vortex forms inside your head, and that's what you take with you when you remote view, astral travel, lucid dream, and when you die, if that is coherent, obviously. And so now suddenly we know that nobody has a physics of consciousness unless they know what you take with you outside your body. And now we know. So you need a charged permissive environment, basically, a sacred space for successful death and to illuminate the lucid dreaming possibility. And we're going to look then at how we measured the frequencies that trigger lucid dreaming, much related to what John Charles did. So here we're talking about that array. At the center point of the squeezing vortex, there's a compression node into when the transverse wave compress, the transverse are up and down. We have a slide in a minute. At the center, there's an organization of the propagation of the EMF into what's called longitudinal interferometry, sometimes called scalar, which simply means the inertia of the electromagnetic wave is traveling parallel to the direction of propagation, therefore enabling squeezing. So it's actually intuitive. Tom Bearden proved by equation that longitudinal waves are the stuff of gravity waves for sure in gravitobiology, but it's actually intuitively obvious because you can't get together and squeeze a center point with a transverse wave going up and down. No, you need the longitudinal component to implode the center point. So it's even intuitively obvious. Now that's later going to explain why you need the longitudinal component from a crystal to do healing. And we're going to talk about that with the Marcel Vogel slide, because I know that Elena and Dan Willis have been working beautifully with the Marcel Vogel story, and I think we can add a little piece to that puzzle. Because I was in Toronto with Marcel Vogel. We did a lot together because I was a systems analyst at IBM also, and he was there. He used the Cleve Baxter technique. We had a polygraph hooked to a plant, and he had his crystal. And he was proving that that plant was responding to him on the polygraph. Now, the point I want to make was that Marcel was totally aware that unless he was holding that crystal and pumping it with his coherent emotion, that's when he could couple with the plant, and not until. So we want to look at the physics of what from your body enables the crystal to dump out that coherent longitudinal wave, compression wave, because we know that same compression wave is the reason they used things like Pyramid and Stonehenge to cause and trigger seed germination, because the centripetal force is the physics of germination of seeds and what plants respond to. So we're going to look at that in a minute. But yeah, so this is me. I can make 5 harmonics in golden ratio often in my brainwaves, but I don't quite climb up to that 44 hertz gamma. Nope. I get lots of bliss, but I need to study the Tibetan gamma. So that's where Jean Charles did. The other thing that's notable here is people who make just octave harmonics in their brainwaves frequently are telepath and not blissful, actually, and that's been measured as well. So the other thing is the node of the trance brainwave. If you measure the brainwave coherence, the node of that golden ratio cascade does trigger literally a burning at the crown. It's measurable in the brainwave if you do the 3-dimensional 32 channel EEG map. And this is all at flameandmind.com. So you answer your question about pineal burning. So here, just the other part of the, someday, Elena, we need to we need to get you hooked up to the brainwave gadget. I think we'd have fun, Elena.
Oh, I just wanted to do it at a conference in France, but because you brought the machine, but
Yeah.
I was busy doing interviews and I couldn't make it. But
Yeah.
we've got to do that.
It's
Absolutely.
it would be so much fun.
to
And you know, we did try to do it at the conference, but the logistics were very tricky. But we're going to have some fun with that with Elena for sure. But this is the point. So
Oh,
with
yes.
Flame in Mind, what we showed here is the front brain is in black and the rear brain is in white. And actually what's needed for this bliss experience, it's actually called in the flow, if you study the sports literature, is actually back brain dominance. It's the amygdala that has to be the dominant. So here you see the white, very dominant, which is back brain, rear brain dominance, which gives you that in the flow, because obviously you have to have instinctively fast reactions. And if your front brain is involved, it's not fast enough to steer that starship, as Elena was talking about how consciousness is required to steer a starship fast.
I want to add just here that Stephen Chua, our Area 51 whistleblower whom I interviewed, he was taken to pilot planes with his mind by thought, because he was abnormally producing gamma brain waves, and he said that this was a success because he could move the planes faster than any physical maneuvers, you know. So
yeah, that's exactly the point. That in fact, the compression point within your brain is where you get leverage. And in fact, I have a slide about that here too, that the fact is that the starships have to go faster than the speed of light. Well, how do you steer faster than the speed of light? Hello. It was called Guild, Navigator, and Doom. We're going to see it's literally access to that same array and much related to coherent lucid dreaming. Anyway, we're not going to do all those slides, but so we'll have a slide about starship navigating. So here is just showing that musically in the music literature, the actual geometry of emotion is known. So if Manfred Klein's, my friend, famously at Centix, microsoundmusic.com, he showed that the change in pressure over time in the touch that says love reaches a point of maximum pressure at golden mean ratio into the duration of the event. So you can actually practice a love hug because you tantrically delay the max pressure in the squeeze. And it's that implosion that actually it causes the bliss. The love is actually perfect embedding. That's why they call it lo-fi.
Oh, Dan, yeah, Enki told me that love, in fact, what is it? It is a frequency, the creative frequency of the universe, which transcribes and is experienced by an emotion when it incarnates into matter, hence into gravity.
Yeah, well, it's beautiful. And, a very related language. You see here that the squeeze of the love hug, if you actually map the change in pressure over time of the birth canal, that the max squeeze also, it's called bond of power of bliss birth, is the same implosive physics where you can bring max memory through birth. But what Enki is saying there is a beautiful introduction also to when conventional physics says, entanglement is how you access action at a distance through an Einstein-Rosen bridge. What they actually mean is phase conjugate golden ratio embedding, literally perfect nesting by golden ratio, is what allows the implosion to connect with a longitudinal array, and that's action at a distance. So embedding perfected long wave phi ratio, literally love, is making that connection. So Enki obviously knows some great physics. And that's where we're going with this conversation. So the next part of the little slideshow was that as we understand entry into a successful dreaming or Stargate, it relates to the compression event also of a successful death. And here are the famous Heinrich Clouvet form constants most of you have seen that you see at the moment of death. It's been measured. It's pretty well documented, hundreds of near-death experiencers, actually. And you see a lattice cobweb tunnel spiral. And what you're seeing is literally the DNA imploding, creating the conditions for inhabiting the larger array. So this is enabled if you're in a sacred space, but it's much more difficult if you're in electrosmog. And so successful death should be designed by an understanding of what sacred space is, which is obviously where the magnetic lines cross and compression is enabled. And the ancients understood this very well to enable successful death and birth. So this is all at goldenmean.info/immortality. So, and this led to the conversation about what we meant by the next dimension was just the next axis of superposed spin enabled by harmonic inclusiveness. And we're going to see a better slide about longitudinal waves here in a minute. So we'll go through this quickly. So just to say that, our therify.net is actually somewhat famous for triggering lucid dreaming. It's plasma, and we feed the same low frequencies you saw in that caduceus phase conjugate pump wave, and we're successfully doing rejuvenation in 25 countries, and we think we can teach the core physics behind what's called medbed. There's two aspects. One is the time reversal, which literally a phase conjugate field is famous for producing in optics, literally time reversal. And the other aspect is that conjugate field producing time reversal is the physics of stem cell dedifferentiation. So those two components together are core to the medbed concept. So we believe that the closest physics on the planet currently, until the ones they're making on the moon get here, is therify.net. In fact, it's marketed also under plasmamedbed.com. But this is an introduction. So again, the physics behind what Elena is talking about, a medbed. So here, after we knew that therify.net is famous for triggering lucid dreaming, we actually looked at scientific literature. And here is the university study on what frequencies cause lucid dreaming, actually around 25 to 40 hertz. The equation calls for 29 and 47 hertz. But you see what that is. The caduceus of compression enables lucid dreaming, connecting you to that array, for the same reason we had that fun question, which we didn't do so good with in the audience in tours, when the lady was talking about lucid dreaming. Do you remember? And
yes, I remember that.
Yeah, and so we tried to explain one way to think about it is why it's so famous that if you want to wake up inside a dream, look at your hand. Well, the physics is quite simple, that the homunculus map of the body on the brain has the biggest space for the hand in the wiring connection. So when you look at your hand, you induce a powerful centripetal electrical do loop, an implosive electrical do loop, looking at your hand, which initiates compression. So that's why they call it the ability to be self-aware, is the ability to self-refer, because self-reference initiates compression. And so this is all about the mechanics of lucid dreaming. This is so important because those who can lucid dream obviously are the ones who take memory through death. And remember, at Montauk, and even the majority of those abducted by the Greys were lucid dreamers. They say 90% had some indigenous blood. So they were looking for a certain kind of DNA that had this kind of coherence. And this is practical instruction. Now, when we grow up as a civilization and realize that our galaxy is based on trade, and what's the most valuable thing that's traded in the galaxy? DNA. Hello.
Yes, it's a currency. Yes,
yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. And what makes DNA valuable? Hello. Which DNA can steer stars? I mean, which DNA?
That's it, because the DNA, the frequency of a specific DNA coding connects with the group, the genetic group, and it's collective and conscious and everything of this culture. So you have access to this culture, and it can be very dangerous when you know how to do that.
And that's what gives you leverage, is that psychokinesis, is the ability of the DNA to implode, get centripetal. That's why they said the high Siakar Draco, the powerful ones, it would feel like a vice-like grip. Well, they had a lot of centripetal force. Of course, they lost long-term memory, had other problems. But the ability to get centripetal is literally the measurement of consciousness. As Bill Tiller proved, focused human attention causes charge to compress. Now we know why. So what I was saying about if we grow up as a civilization, we understand what Enki had in mind with Adam Kadmon, he said, oh, 12 ET galactic civilizations were cooking on the recipe here for the DNA. He says, ooh, this could be high leverage. And the trick is the spacing of what genetic people on this planet call junk DNA, which is not junk at all.
Oh, no.
It's an implosive spacing algorithm so that during implosive recursive braiding, due to the phonon phase conjugate pump wave of bliss, the DNA implosion goes to completion. And that gives us leverage. And that's why they say, and we don't blame Eisenhower for this. Laura, let's apologize to Laura here and be very nice. Eisenhower was attacked by the most trickiest grays in the galaxy, and Elena has talked about this many times. And so Eisenhower,
he didn't sign with the grays. Yeah.
No.
The
MJ12
did it.
They tricked him, and even they could be forgiven because they were tricked by the trickiest ones around.
Yes, and they had been warned a year before, but
yeah,
MJ12.
Yeah, and we even
power.
Well, and we said years ago that Earth humans are going to become the vaccine for the Orion Wars. And I think we were right, because those same 3 tall grays who tricked Eisenhower MJ12.
Oh, yes.
They used them to make the vaccine for the Orion Wars.
Oh, yes. I get what you say. Absolutely. Yes. That was a karma.
Yeah.
Because they were sent back with a virus to infect the hive, and boom.
Exactly. Yeah. We were the vaccine for the Orion Wars, and it worked. I just think that's so cool. Anyway,
so cool.
You're right. The karma, that was what we call almost instant karma. So this longitudinal coherence that you make around your body when you have access to bliss, which Jean-Charles did, is what we call rainbow light body or Kesjan body, or like Ba from the Ka. And in Dune, this was related to the Guild Navigator of Dune. And we're going to talk about this, what they call boson 7 at Montauk, or microchloridians in the blood, identifies this implosion in the DNA. So this is a lady who had a bliss experience in her plasma well. And this is just the background about Therify. And this is not an ad. Actually, we have more interest than we need. Just explaining the science, which is that if you make phase conjugate implosion broad spectral, you actually do rejuvenation. And this is literally this is the French version. And this is literally the picture in Egypt. We talked about this before, so that when they said, I will make a Shem unto the Lord, and that was mistranslated, we're going to make an altar in the church. No. We are going to make an electric field that reverses aging. That's what a Shem unto the Lord is, which Sitchin almost translated correctly when he said Highward Firestone. What he really meant was implosive capacitor. That's what an altar in church is, because it causes rejuvenation, literally negentropy. So they were actually using a bias voltage and insulating a plasma tube, because their biggest problem when they got here, obviously, was they were aging catastrophically, because they were used to, just like Harkonnen and Dune, they needed life support. So this is the principle behind the broad spectral phase conjugate implosion of Therify.net. And just to show the background, this is a picture of how the pine cones kissing noses at the Planck threshold creates phase conjugate implosion. And here in the red circle is the connection to the longitudinal array. So this is Therify originally was based on Antoine Priory, famous here in France, who healed thousands of cancers documented by the French government, but never figured out how or why. But when we saw that the frequency he used, Antoine Priory, 310, 32, 80, which he got from Lakowski, Tesla, and Rife, actually fit my equation almost exactly. That's the moment we realized that phase conjugate negentropy was the principle behind Antoine Priory, which he never discovered and never learned what phase conjugation was. That's the day we decided to build Therify.net, which is now successful in 25 countries. And by the way, we do remote healing, bliss meditations. And I'm not saying you need a gadget to do it, but it is fun. And this is just some more in the literature, that this was very successful at triggering seed germination and plant growth. And Therify is famous for that. The roses across the street last longer every time. So this is plant life. And this is just some of the videos before and after we expose the plasma, the blood actually gets stronger. It's called derouleau or declumping. And the blood is stronger when it's able to stand by itself because there's more access to surface, basically the same way people are more powerful if they're able to stand by themselves. Actually, and this is very measurable. This derouleau declumping is very consistent in the plasma. Also, their epitaxial water will help do this. But the live blood cell studies are pretty famous. So now we're developing another device called piezo fire, which makes the same implosion in a micro array, which enables you to do it in very inexpensively. And we have plasmafire.com. It's all about this implosion. So this is how plasma mutates. In very French, it was called somatid cycles from Gaston Naissance. And in France, it was called microzymes. And so this is the morphing of plasma inside the cell, so much in phase with the plasma outside the cell. And these are the pictures of how we dramatically affect plant growth, obviously. So here now we're getting to the part in the slideshow about the Stargate and the portal. So here is, if you're trying to imagine the collapse point between Jean-Charles Moyen's eyes, when he said, well, in one eye I saw where I was coming from, the other side I saw where I was going to. What was happening between his eyes? This is actually an animation based on the Newport Tower designed by John Dee and the pinhole mirror concept. But basically, at the turn inside out point where the bow tie is tied, as it were, there's a compression node, so much so that when light would twinkle or what's called scintillate at the scintillation point, John Dee actually used those nodes for ancestor communication because of the compression at that point, enabling the communication into the array. And that's what actually ancestor memory inhabits. So just animating the science. So the transverse waves, basically they vibrate perpendicular to the direction of propagation electromagnetically, and even acoustically, most waves are longitudinal. Whereas in the longitudinal waves, the compression is parallel to the direction of propagation, sometimes called scalar. And that's very important because only that longitudinal component, you visualize, if somebody's squeezing you and they were going like this, it wouldn't be a very good squeeze, would it? No, but if somebody's squeezing you like this, and that's how Tom Bearden concluded that gravity waves are longitudinal waves. Well, if you want to get symmetrical squeezing going, sometimes called phase conjugation, so this was called four-wave mixing, or the sacred four directions. It's actually the first time that negentropy was measured in phase conjugate optics. You had to get lasers doing exactly this because when you set up,
yeah, it's
pardon?
a pulse. It's comparable to a pulse signal.
Yes.
Traversing.
Yes, and that
matter, yeah.
Yes, and that pulse, you see, all of our communication electromagnetically uses only the transverse component. Our scientists don't know how to pick up a longitudinal component yet. Oops. That's why they haven't figured out why objects fall to the ground. It's a little embarrassing, really. but the point is that the transverse waves enters at the top of that cone, and on the side of that vortex, going down that vortex of Goldman's spiral, making the caduceus, there's what's called translation of vorticity. So squeezed out the toothpaste tube, specifically at the Planck threshold, is the longitudinal, which is the organized directional propagation, which goes farther. And then those longitudinal nodes, they make a fractal array, which looks like this, basically. And so the inertia that was transverse, which can contain heat at a distance, you can actually contain heat at a distance with longitudinal interferometry. Basically, that's what the Foo Fighters in Germany were. This was plasma from microwave coherent longitudinal interferometry. The Germans figured it out, the Russians figured it out, and the Americans, nope. And Tom Bearden wrote all about that. But this is actually living plasma. And what they call the tic-tac today, that's going so fast, it's nodal microwave longitudinal interferometry. That's what that is. Those are those nodes. The other part of this is at the longitudinal compression node, the bouncing in and out of that array goes faster than light, specifically by golden ratio times the speed of light. And that's called a multiply connected topology, multiple harmonics of golden ratio times c, light speed. And that's why the Stargate at the center of the galaxy, you spoke about this, Elena, the trapezium, which is a square cube, is the most powerful Stargate in the galaxy because the array is more broad spectral, the conjugation, the compression. And therefore there is more harmonics times golden ratio times the speed of light inhabiting that array, meaning you can go farther. So that's why the Theraphi is more broad spectral than, for example, Minkowski, the same physics. So that the point is that once Professor Raymond Chow measured the dominant faster than light speed measured between 1.5 and 1.7 times c, that's a smoking gun centered amazingly around 1.618 golden ratio, which is proof that this theory, the superluminal connection, requires, and obviously John Charles's connection was superluminal. When you met in Japan that time?
Yeah. Well, I need technology to teleport. Well, I don't know where I am in my evolution at the moment, but Jean Charles doesn't need technology, does it himself?
And let's get the humans up to the point where they don't see this as a mystery. They see this as the physics of an array. You know, you inhabit an array inside your brain. It's called your synapses. When you grow up, you just inhabit a bigger array. How do you get coherent enough to do that? That's this longitudinal physics. So this is Tom Bearden's famous book, which really is very good background in the deep science on this, and spent half his life studying Prairie too. This is what in Egypt they call the raising of the Djed. The Djed was literally the plasma projectivity of that implosion. You know, like the microchloridians in the blood. Well, this is what a Jedi Knight. Oh, a Jedi means the physics of plasma projection enabled by that coherence in the blood, obviously. And since
I
was
have
called,
to say, it's the first time I realized that the Djed pillar represents actually longitudinal waves.
well, it represents, yes, the ability to implode by golden ratio. And see, that's the point. When you get that vortex working, and this is why the Mercury vortex made gravity for the Germans right here. This is the answer, that in that vortex, the stack, it had to be a 76-degree angle because that's what makes golden ratio work. That's the angle of the tip of Russian and the base of Egyptian pyramids. It enables the golden ratio cascade. And with that stack angle, this is the piezoelectric water vortex of Schauberger making gravity now. So at the moment it's spontaneously starting getting colder, which is called implosive negentropy. It started making voltage from gravity and making gravity. And the reason is right here. So in that stack of that vortex, the transverse would get converted to the longitudinal at the tip if the incident of implosive compression aligned correctly so that that translation of vorticity was efficient, so that coming in transverse, it emerged as longitudinal, named a gravity wave. So the more it spit out that longitudinal wave out the nose of the vortex, the more gravity you make, and you need the right angle of compression to do it. And the Egyptians knew it, and Schauberger got it. And so this is called impulse power. Literally, this is reason why a Mercury vortex is impulse power. It's an impulse.
Yeah, and it's a principle of the pyramid generators of the crystal that's actually a 60-degree angle, because when you send these compression waves into the ether, it generates frill.
It generates...
So, frill, the energy.
Oh, vril. Yes. In my view, vril would be another name for the longitudinal component, actually. In fact, VRIL, it's called the V for the vortex, and the L means the phase shift. It's perfect. But what I would say, we want to look more at that when we get to the slide about Marcel's crystals, because the 6-degree angle is perfect for octave cascades, but for golden ratio cascades, you know, that's why the hex geometry of quartz crystal without an external phase conjugate pump wave doesn't. And we're going to talk about that shortly when we get to the physics of warp.
Yeah, that's why the Marcel Vogel crystals have a 60-degree angle point.
Yes, yes. But, you know, notice that when they make that crystal, instead of just a straight hex, he makes the angle more like a cone. And by making the side angle more like a cone, it creates the ability to implode. Because if it was just hex and pure square, you wouldn't have any implosive conjugation. But still, that crystal will take on its most power when there's a human holding it, making a phase conjugate pump wave.
Yeah, the consciousness is the key.
Yeah.
Without consciousness, it doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. And what that consciousness adds is the phase conjugate pump wave, we believe. And we have a little graphic about that. So this is the summary of the electrical function of pyramids. Because it implodes the capacitance of the Schumann phase conjugate pump wave, it's called a gravity diode. The emergence of coherent longitudinal stabilizes gravity and atmosphere and pumps into that array, which was functional global wireless power from the pyramids. You could pick it up only at the dodecaecosa nodes of the longitudinal array, and it works. But Tesla had the frequency wrong, and he had the location of the nodes wrong. So Tesla did not succeed, actually, although he did succeed in making some earthquakes, we think. So also the pyramid was implosive seed plant growth activator. And one of the dominant functions for many ancient stone circles was seed germination. And it could do age reversal. It was global wireless power. It was also a plasma projector, the Baf and the Ka, which, for example, the hollow shaft pointing to Sirius and Orion, literally you could squirt gun your aura to the desired destination through the tube, but because it's plasma projective, also could serve as plug access for global wireless power for the StarCraft, et cetera. So function of pyramids, and we did a great film on that with Sam Osmanagic, the Bosnian pyramid array. So this is more about phase conjugation in brain waves. We're not going to do all these slides, but just here. So if you take that golden ratio times Planck, and you have these cycles per second, which predicts the alpha, theta, beta of the brainwave cascade, predicts the Schumann harmonics, and then in cycles per minute, it predicts the sacrocranial infrasound of the spine liquid pump, physics of Kundalini and bliss. It all fits that cascade. Literally, the breath cascades you use to create bliss, which is actually the physics of spine liquid pump. So it's all about, and this is all in our physics of Kundalini, a new film at goldenmean.info/Kundalini. For example, here in red are the frequencies predicted by the equation, Planck ratio. Here in green are the known frequencies of the spine liquid pump, cause and mechanism of Kundalini and bliss. And even the Mayer wave, most important frequency in the blood, 0.1 hertz. So remember, if your spine liquid is pumping, it is clinically impossible to be depressed. How does it pump? As Upledger proved. And this is all about the physics of Kundalini, which is behind what Jean-Charles and I and others have been working on. And this is Benthoff, my teacher and mentor, showing how, here's that homunculus we talked about on the surface of the brain. Notice a big space for the hand there. And this is the motor of Kundalini, is this cascade up of the spine liquid up the brain waves. And it's actually a torus focused on the pineal. Hello. So if somebody says,
here we go.
If somebody says it's all in your head, you say, well, it's both. But here, this is really cool. So, we measured the ringing in the ears, sangreal, heard by hundreds of meditators with Benthoff. And this is what you got below here in the harmonics. And this is the equation. So this, and they say this is the, ancestors are calling sangreal, song in the blood. Well, ancestors literally do call. Valerie hears ringing in her ear and knows which it is. But
yeah. And the children in the experiment, they say they hear the ancestors.
Yes, exactly. Well, this, with my clairaudience, sometimes I hear ancestor voices, like when I was in Cherokee Sacred Burial Ground with Dahani Wahoo, really, I could hear. But my clairvoyance, but the kids have the clairvoyance when they go into this bliss state, actually. And so it's coherence into that array. And this is about recursive turning inside out and folding and how the compression enables that connection. This is talking about the physics of compassion. If you look at the electrical origin of the heartbeat, the heart turns inside out recursively, electrically, and literally you would turn yourself inside out for your lover. And so the heart is actually imploding electrically, and we're calling that compassion, which is literally embedding, which is the physics of action and distance. And this is called non-destructive self-reentry, not only a definition of consciousness, but the definition of golden mean spiral. And this becomes the flame that does not consume, the perfect flame. I'm I'm going fast because, you know, I wanted to get to the part about the atom Kadmon. So when Kepler said planetary orbitals are golden ratio and are actually a nest of platonic solids, he was basically saying he was correct. He was saying charge collapse is what stabilized gravity, and the nest of platonics has to be golden ratio based and enables charge collapse. So what he's saying is the reason planetary orbitals are platonics is because implosive charge collapse is the only way to stabilize gravity. And that was by design. Hello, Hermes. And this enables action at a distance, which is when the nodes connect in the array. And here we just animate what the array looks like. It's the only possible three-dimensional fractal. This is the star mother kit, golden mean.info/kit. And that embedding produces that perfect connectivity into the array. And so obviously if you studied your chemistry carefully, you know that the electron orbitals are simply platonic solids only, and your chemistry teacher should have told you, because then you could visualize psychokinetically. And interestingly, also the arrangement of the nuclear hadrons in the nucleus. Guess what? Tetracube, octaecosa. Hello, charge collapse. What holds the nucleus together?
There we go.
So this was from Elena, actually, talking about the trapezium. You know, did they call it the cube in Orion? Elena,
yes. So I was always told from the start, when I had this information, that it was called the cube because it was a cube cluster. But the astronomers always said it's a trapezium. It's like just 4 big stars, and you know. But recently they discovered with the James Webb Telescope that there were actually stars behind these 4, and it actually forms a kind of a cube, trapezoidal cube.
Yeah.
And I went, yes.
Exactly. Because if you want lasers to conjugate, you got to make a cube. It's called 4-wave mixing. And the ancestors called it the sacred 4 directions. And they were all about stargates, actually. And so here's the most powerful stargate in the galaxy. Well, how do they do it? They get the masses lined up. And the thing that's cute, actually, and I believe this came from the Hopi Peshmatan. I think we talked about they called it the Way of the Nine when we did our film on the Nine. Literally, the Hopi had a term for the Way of the Nine, Peshmatan. And this is a gravity lens, and that's the light cone. And I think we have an animation of that here. And so this is the famous golden spiral on Orion. And the geometry of Orion, seen from a distance, actually, Betelgeuse, Mintaka, Alnitak, is a double cone. And the name for that cone is Yod He Vahe. Inhabit, Yahweh, inhabit the cone. You know, and Lil was a wannabe. He called himself a double light cone, but didn't quite make it.
Yeah, he took this name, which Yahweh is a title. It was
That's right.
His name.
So exactly.
He took the title Yahweh to play God Almighty.
And if you want to play God, you got to be a double cone. Oh, hello, Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh, opposite cones.
Yeah, but it wasn't his real name.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So we got to wake up and realize what God is, and it ain't a person. It's a plasma principle, which is inhabitable. So this was called the Antarian conversion, the Orion. And this is another picture of a vortex. I don't know how this slide's out of order, but I know we're getting to the Vimana Nazi belt section here. So in this vortex, you can see why there's a voltage difference between the narrow point and the wide point. Why Hitler wrote Schauberger a check after it became an electrical generator. Had to be piezoelectrically doped and contains the principle of the Mercury vortex as well. So not only is the implosion through Planck producing longitudinal the reason this makes voltage, it's also the reason this makes gravity. And that's why also the Mercury vortex had to be doped with iron powder, making it red. So you had magnetic flux permissivity as well as high specific gravity inertia.
Yeah, and in the spaceship's propulsion, when they work with torsion fields to cancel the mass, it works. They have either highly heated plasma or either mercury, iodine, and that's why it creates. It's propelled in the double toroidal, the 2 toroidal coils that are working perpendicularly. You know, the mercury is flowing in one that way and in the other one like this, and that creates the torsion field.
And,
So
yeah,
it's
and like just like you need two gyroscopes to navigate, if you have them set perpendicular, you can create propulsion this way or this way. And yeah, I had some fun, detailed conversations with Tony Rodriguez about that too, because I think he was actually on those ships doing maintenance on some of them gadgets.
Yeah, oh, totally, yes, for years.
And that's what's so cool. So many of the SSP experiencers confirm what Elena's talking about. So we're here to say that physics is real, and let's grow up, kids. So actually what's happening is specifically the angle of that vortex spits out the longitudinal wave at the center of that cone, and that's a compression wave, which literally has a push to it. Hello, gravity making. So it ain't that complicated, actually. So that's what we call impulse power. And they got some of that from the Vimana stories, the Glocka and Nazi Bell, and you've all seen the pictures. So that propulsion physics you can understand for yourself. And we have actually designed toroidal coils and wound windings and wrote equations to prove that principle, or electrogravitics, for example, fractalfield.com/propulsion. A very simple way for you to be empowered to understand yourself. Physicists say it's a mystery how the famous EM drive, here's the picture, electromagnetic drive, electrogravitic. Why does it make gravity? Well, it's simple. The microwave inside is making a caduceus right here. And at the climax point of that caduceus is the implosion that spits out a longitudinal. That's why it's a gravity maker. And it should be optimized, by the way, with my equation. So we have a lot of animations of these. Too many movies, so little time. But speaking of, so this is in terms of nesting the gyroscopes. So the perpendicular relationship of the Earth, solar, and galactic equator and the relative nutation rate actually is about what they meant by planet taming with pyramids as gravity diodes. In order to stabilize gravity in atmosphere, literally, they needed to lock into phase planetary, solar, and galactic orbits into the right phase angle, not just for gravity maintenance and atmosphere maintenance, but for life to evolve. This is the kind of thinking Hermes, Enki were doing when they spent millions of years planning where to plant the seeds of the cedars. And Elena's courageous new book about that, which is great. So Elena and I talked about this before. We're not sure this is actually the starship Excelsior.
No, it's an artistic representation of it. It's not accurate.
Yeah, it's not real. But I think the suggestion here was that if you imagine there's a crystal at the core, like one of Vogel's quartz, or at least piezo, or I think they called it lithium niobate. Don't the niobium crystals, Scotty?
Niobate.
Yes, and that's called
yes.
That's called a phase conjugate dielectric, which is implosive capacitance, and that crystal then is triggered by a phase conjugate pump wave, which is here, and that's the actual electrode connection to that crystal, making it a gravity maker. And here is the example in the physics literature. Fractalfield.com/propulsion. It was called the Koski-Frost crystal. It made 800% of its own weight in gravity with a phase conjugate pump wave. And the book on that from our wonderful partner, Elizabeth Bill Donovan, who confidential, well, I guess it's okay to mention, this is our partners with Dave, your friend, actually. So, and by the way, Elizabeth says he talked to Dave about a week ago. I'm checking on that for you. I'm working on that story. Make sure Dave is okay.
Yes, he needs to be okay because he's he revealed quite
a lot. Yeah, that's right.
A lot.
Yeah, and this is an example. So we have gravity making experiments. So this is a practical example in the literature. The Koski-Frost crystal lithium niobate phase conjugate dielectric implosion. So you got a phase conjugate pump wave hits that helix at the center of the quartz crystal. So visualize, here's the phase conjugate pump wave at the center, and the helix is here stably vibrating. Now, if the phase conjugate pump wave is implosive, then up the z-axis, which rotates the plane of polarity of light, it's called birefringence. And so out the ends of that double helix will come longitudinal implosion if it's nourished by an external phase conjugate pump wave. And this is Marcel Vogel, by the way, he was sweating immensely when he finally got the plant polygraph to respond. I was there, actually. And I had a lot of conversation with him about this. But for example, although he was very powerful at IBM, to align the facet planes with the molecular planes, you have to actually measure which axis in the quartz, which is called the z-axis, maximally rotates the plane of polarized light. And that's how you measure whether the facet plane is aligned with the molecular plane. If you want to make, for example, a fire crystal in Atlantis, you know. So, and our friend Virgil Bottom wrote The Theory and Design of Quartz Crystal Oscillators. So there's a lot to say here, but the summary for a short mention of is just that without the external phase conjugate pump wave, the crystal does not sustainably dump out a longitudinal or scalar, and that compressional is what heals. So basically, you train yourself to make that bliss wave, that implosion in your heart, you know, setting your pure intention. And then your crystal gives you leverage on that. It's great. But if it's not happening inside you, as Elena said. So here is, I put this together the day I heard you talk about those floating platforms in the clouds of Saturn and Jupiter.
Oh, yes, let's talk about this. Yes, yes. So I can remind the audience that I had the opportunity to visit these in the atmosphere of Saturn, the ruins of ancient cities. It's very, very, very ancient. And so it all looks ruined, but it's on rocks that float on by anti-gravity. And I was amazed. I asked, but how is there technology still going on for all this time that keeps them the anti-gravity, the mass cancellation working? What's the engine? And he was with me, was the one who was taking me there, said, no, there's no technology. It's the very materials in which these cities were built that has this natural property.
Yeah.
So that walk away.
So that set me to meditating. Elena, I listened to Elena very carefully when she said that, and I thought to myself, well,
yeah, me too.
No, we have this website called goldenmean.info/gravity politics. And this famous Russian, Grebennikov, you see, one day he was walking over a particular mound of earth in which he noticed he would actually float. He would get much lighter and almost float over this mound. And he realized in that mound, there was a huge, like many tons of ancient insect skeletons. And he learned to gather those insect skeletons, put them in a box, and then he floated. And he did a lot of travel. He literally made a little gravity device simply by assembling the insect skeletons. And this has been widely studied, actually. This is not even a mystery. It's called the cavity structure effect. Inside the insect skeletons, there's a certain cavity. Well, if you visualize that cavity as a capacitor that looks like a cone. Hello.
Yes, I see the drawing there. It looks like it.
Yeah. So basically, the insect, after a few million years, evolves a way to make gravity with their bones. They say, there's a joke about this. They say the postman in Tibet also floated. But in the way they studied the physics, the insect's wing actually produced a phonon wave, which would enhance this effect. But the effect by itself still can be gravity making, as you can see here. He actually floated. I've seen films of these things. This is real. This is not a fantasy. So
yeah,
if you get... Go ahead.
Sorry, no, I just wanted to mention the bumblebee, the size of his body and the size of his wings. Mechanically, he cannot fly.
Yeah,
he
nobody ever told the bumblebee he just disobeyed the laws of physics.
Yeah. Sorry to cut you down. I had to
no. That's right. That's right. That bumblebee has been disobeying the laws of physics, and we weren't even insulted. but no, part of the reason is because the phonon phase conjugate pump wave of the humming of the wing enhances the cavity structure effect and makes the implosive capacitance more projective for the longitudinal, thus making it float. And you can read there's lots of stories. There's hundreds of websites. So goldenmean.info/gravity politics. And that implosion capacity, if you take implosion in water, if the water's a little bit piezoelectrically, which is say hard water, this is our imploder.com. So all of our technologies, the imploder, the plasma therapy, and flame and mine, are based on this principle. And I spent 15, 20 years working on the CAD CAM to build this. So the imploder.com, and now we do this large scale commercially. We make implosion in water, in brainwaves, in plasma. This is charge collapse in the jitterbug, mechanism of superconductivity. And so this is a summary. Warp propulsion in Star Trek Coastly Frost actually means access to the wormhole. So they said entanglement physics makes the wormhole work. We say entanglement perfection is the problem phase conjugation solves. We say time-space is not bent or warped. It is a gradient of acceleration. Once you realize that time is only a name for relative spin rate, nothing more. So the reason that we said gravity makes time speed up is just because if you accelerate toward the center of the vortex, the spin rate goes up slightly by translation of vorticity, and that's named time.
Yes.
So it's very important to keep a reference for that, because otherwise it gets very confusing about people taking it, but time is the next dimension. It's simply relative spin rate. It's very easy to think about. So charge collapse.
Time is interdependent on gravity, isn't it?
Yes. Well, gravity is only a name for the acceleration caused by fractal self-similarity, obviously. And if you accelerate towards center, part of that inertia accelerating you linearly will, in the translation of vorticity, the toroidal nature of the plasma of every atom, be partially translated into increased spin rate. And that spin rate is named time. That's why time speeds up or slows down depending upon. So time is not a mystery. And when they say there is no time at such and such a point, that's also not that helpful language. Actually, at the center of compression, at the node in the longitudinal array, it's true that virtually all spins could converge. And so when we say all time is present, what we mean is there is a phase lock to a potential infinite number of spins. So this is more about the proof here that the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics is golden mean ratio. This is a smoking gun. This is proof that the reason that golden mean ratio is the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics, that's a powerful statement, is because that fractal self-similarity is the only way to stabilize gravity and atmosphere. This is the centerpiece of all of Hermes' work, named the caduceus. And this is spirosolaris.ca. So this implosion of charge, called charge collapse, all the scientists agree is the cause of gravity and consciousness. What they didn't understand until me was, what is the cause of charge collapse? And this is Bill Tiller. I knew him very well, proving that focused attention causes charge to collapse or compress. This has been measured many times, but he admitted he didn't have a clue as to why. So this is called the collapse of the wave function is the mechanism of consciousness. This is widely agreed. This is not new information. The new information is what causes the charge collapse. This is the physicists agreeing that wave collapse causes consciousness, wave collapse causes gravity. And this new mechanism of consciousness is charge collapse. That is what PlanckFire.com is about. And the Star Trek physics, actually, we did this in our this was from our last presentation with you, the raising of the Jedi conjugate gravity. So just background to what John Charles did with the Stargate portal. In the film Stargate, the actual letters used, and my coordinator when I co-founded Gaia TV, actually helped produce the movie Stargate. We were there, actually. But these are the letters on the Stargate. This is called Ophanim Enochian, and the symbol, the geometry of those letters, this is also how you build an angel body and do magic. You actually implode charge. And the symmetry of those letters is called a hypercube. And that hypercube produces this kind of compression of turning inside out, literally implosion, which is how Stargates work. We're just going to finish this slideshow. I know we're carrying on a little long. But this is the picture of that implosion. So if you understood charge collapse, wave collapse, you know what ghosts do after death. You know how tornadoes are steered, how plasma heals, the origin of angels, how vortex heals water, physics of lucid dreaming, why ball lightning responds to telepathy, how your brain's plasma vortex sees without eyes and bliss, and how Jean-Charles made a Stargate. And Valerie did a lot of work putting this into French. And so this is the golden ratio. This is the implosion. And this is how you visualize. Here's the top-down view of hydrogen. The waves are adding and multiplying, not just their wavelength, but the phase velocity. And the experience of the adding and multiplying of the phase velocity causes that kind of compression to produce acceleration towards center, named the gravity. So that's the reason gravity exists. That's the reason objects fall to the ground. And that's the reason implosion exists, is because golden ratio allows that recursive adding and multiplying, and is the generalized solution to constructive wave interference in general in all of wave mechanics. And we publish those equations, why golden ratio is the solution of compression. Remember, the solution of compression is the solution of almost every problem in physics: alchemy, fusion, urban design, history of computers, how to get through death. It's all about solution of compression. And this is just showing that then predicts the definition of sacred, all sacred dimension. That what we call sacred in dimension is just access to charge collapse. These are
Greatest
the
power of the universe, and we all have it within us.
That's right. And we're built on these dimensions because if we couldn't do charge collapse, and this is called phase conjugate magnetics. I did this work with Elizabeth Rauscher famously, which is behind therapy.net, which is very healing. This, even Steiner correctly called this the 7 stages of invagination. Notice that torus turns inside out and disassembles into 7 smaller toroids at the phase angle of the 7 spins of the tetra, called the 7 arrows of the heart. We want to see those 7 arrows when we conclude about how DNA gets a soul here. This is how related physics, that when you do the turning inside out recursively, called infinity walk, and dramatically heal or help dyslexia measurably, that literally what that turning inside out does, infinity walk, actually focuses the plasma compression between the hemispheres, just like Jean Charles, radically assisting people with dyslexia, because dyslexics have more wiring in the corpus callosum, but less sorting. So if you twist the donut to bring the turning inside out to focus by doing the cross crawl, my friend Deborah Lawrence wrote that book. This is the history of golden ratio and brain waves. We're not going to do all that work. And this is just from movie Contact, Jodie Foster and the dodecahedron. So this is the physics of Agnihotra. Notice the 4 directions. Why it works at sunrise and sunset is because that 4 directions is 4-wave mixing. Literally, phase conjugation enables why your hair stands up when you do Agnihotra at the right time. And this is also the physics of why things like therapy and birth and death and remote healing all work better at sunrise, sunset, equinox, solstice, when you get those alignments, the sacred 4-wave mixing, because it accesses a longitudinal ray. And that's the cold flame. And it's actually built in a copper and gold pyramid, the ancient science of Agnihotra. And the stupa design.
Yes, that's the...
Go ahead.
Sorry, I want to say something. I'll let you finish first.
Well, no, I'm going too fast here, Elena. I'm sorry. You please.
Okay, I'm going to place this here that people know I'm a druid, and I'm trained in mystical ancient traditions. That's what the druids are, passing on this power, this and knowledge since the time where this knowledge was hidden. You know what I mean? So I learned that we have a ritual of opening a sacred space within which the magic will happen. We will open portals and access to dimensions. We call upon the 4 directions: sunrise, noon, sunset, and midnight. And we go clockwise. And then when the 4 directions of the sun are invoked, opened, we go in center and we raise the tree of life from the ground, and we open the 3 realms: the underground realm of the earth, the realm of the surface, the living realm around us, which is the water, and above us, the realm of the sky. And that's when we connect to the universe. I want to mention this because that's exactly what you were saying with
Yes.
science.
It's beautiful. You've implemented that so nicely. That's a perfect parallel. Yes. I was trained by the Sufis, and they had, the dervish turn, they accessed time travel. They knew by the dervish turn, and the four directions were also important. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Native Americans, everyone knows the rituals of these ancient traditions where this knowledge, this scientific knowledge has been encoded in rites and myth to be able to survive through the ages.
Yes, and so they all knew that when you got these light cones lined up, you access the sacred space, and the ritual of lining your emotions to these things was the key. This is from the Templar. Yes, this was from the Templar literature. They call this the Rochelle grid and the Templars, and even the Grail animation, which we played.
Choosing compassion carefully aligns the magnetic field donuts around the heart so that nest dodeca icasa perfect embedding, self not self, squirting pineal pine cone through the speed of light into time, intent creates the future, and revolving that spin path to 0 point in the blood, we get the Holy Grail, which has no inside or outside, solves the problem of separateness, contains, self-embeds the Sufi heart within heart, feminine reproductive organs, into that 3D fractal you can zoom in forever and always see the same thing, heart within heart, perfectly self-contained, self-embedded compassion.
I think I made that about almost 25 years ago.
So beautiful.
Am I still young? I don't know.
The same voice.
Yeah, it was a while. But notice the swastika in there. This is actually about implosion. And now we want to see that in DNA. And this is from Hermes and the emerald tablets. And notice that the Tibetan Bon Po idea of the swastika is actually the Grail animation. And the perfect bonfire was that cold flame, actually. And so the Tibetan, Bon Po is actually about making the perfect cold flame. So here, finally, we get to the conclusion here. It was a bit much. Sorry if I carried on too much, but I had all these visuals.
Oh no, I would go on for hours. It's so fascinating.
But we had some fun. But the conclusion here is definitely supposed to be, do we really understand Enki's plan for Adam Kadmon, how to make a DNA that could implode and make a soul and be born in the twinkling of millions of stars? What did he mean? This is intended to point to that question anyway. So first of all, in the structure of DNA, the point here is that if you take the center part, first we want to answer, what did we mean by 12 strands? If you say 12 strands to a biophysicist, they laugh at you, say, this is crap. But when you talk about superposed axes of spin symmetry revealed in the spectrum analysis of the DNA, then you actually have literally 12 strands. And here's that physics. So the center, if you take
at that moment when
if you take a cube and nest it, if you nest a cube in a dodecahedron, you have 7 spins outside. There are 7 spins, and then 5 spins inside. And so 5 cubes embed in the dodeca. You can almost see that cube in here, that this is a tetra cube.
Here we go. Yeah.
Green and red. And we had that on stage in tours. So this is 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside. And this is what the clairvoyants saw, the slipknot called Anu, real meaning of sun god, more than the dad of Enki and Enlil. Why was he called Anu? Well, why did we name sun god Anu? Well, when the clairvoyants saw, they looked at the human heart, the heart of hydrogen, and the heart of the sun. And in every case, the clairvoyants saw the same thing. They called it Anu, 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside, the perfect slipknot. For example, the true physics of the origin of heart muscle, the 7 spins of the tetra in the 7 layers of heart muscle in the sections of Pettigrew in fields of form, vortex of life. So this is the perfect slipknot. Now, let's look for 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside. So here is the dodeca, which is the 4th axis of spin, ratcheted down a slinky or helix to map one rung of DNA, one vertical turn of DNA rotation. And so that is literally the 5th axis of superposed spin symmetry, 5 spins in the thread of DNA, 5 spins.
Right.
And by the way,
one
there's
thread. That's
yeah,
it.
there's actually a golden ratio between the vertical axis and the horizontal axis. There's a whole physics on a golden ratio in that braid. So, and this is called grammatical man, information, entropy, language, and life, which is this story that the context richness of the braid in DNA is actually the pattern for the perfect language of embeddability. And so now we want to look at that braiding algorithm that when you take that thread and then you braid the braid of the braid on the braid, so that there's a thread. This is the thread here on the right, and then that is braided into string, and the string is braided into rope, and the rope is braided into fat rope. That recursive braiding operation actually, is actually phonon induced measurably by the bliss measured in heart and brain coherence. And I caused those measurements to be made by Glenn Ryan, proving the DNA braid responds to love. I mean, heart coherence. You literally make your own DNA braid implode if you make those coherent phonons of bliss and love heart coherence. You can read the story at realheartcoherence.com, how I am credited in the literature with inventing the word heart coherence, because I invented how it's measured. But you see that braid in the braid, that's the point. So we know now that this onset of coherence in the EKG power spectrum, which is what I discovered how to measure and taught HeartMath Institute how to do it, this is the difference before and after DNA was exposed to heart coherence in the density of the enzyme responsible for the braiding at the zipper. Your DNA literally goes shh, braids and tightens in the presence of love. This is what Elena meant when she says, you're going to do that for yourself. Put the 12th strand in there. So this is actually, you see the Heinrich-Clouvet form constants here in the braiding algorithm of DNA, and you see the golden ratio in the vertical, horizontal, and rotational axis. This is from the famous Ann Ting. She got this from Coxeter, and my animations were based on the inspiration from my friend Ann Ting 25 years ago. Actually, it's important to say. So the recursive braiding in the DNA is actually embedding, it's actually tornado steering, it's actually perfect nesting. And this golden ratio in DNA actually allows length, area, and volume to be conserved. Oh, yeah. You see how that's three-dimensional?
Yeah.
And so this is an animation of the braid on the braid within the braid. And this animation is not mine. I didn't originate this animation. The other ones all did. But you see it's a wave on a wave with a wave with a wave. And the seventh time you recursively braid the DNA, here's a photomicrograph of the DNA in a torus, a donut.
There we go.
The seventh spin, 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside. And here is the Lord of the Ring. Oh, it's a ring donut. Oh, the ring will, whoever has that pure intention will actually create reality because their DNA implodes and makes them psychokinetic. And the index to the braiding of that implosion is actually the physics of alphabet, which is the light on the side of Lord of the Ring, actually. And we have animations of that. So here's the 7 spins outside. If you look at the torus from the index of the tetra, you get the origin of Hebrew, that spiral on the torus. And the animation of that is here. So here's Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet. So this is actually written in the heart muscle. And all we're doing is indexing the 7 spins of the tetra, which is, by the way, the angle of the layers of heart muscle, 7 layers, 7 axes of tilt of the tetra, which 7 spins the tetra is the 7 spins outside. And so it's actually written in your heart, as it were, how to implode and turn inside out. So the climax slide. If we got to the end, we made it, Elena. No, here's the climax slide. So drum roll, please. Yes, thank you. This was supposed to be the climax slide in tours, but obviously I didn't quite make it. But no, we see our friend made this measurement, I think it was measured 11 times, that when 1 million children sang the same song together, there was a dramatic effect reducing solar flares, measured 11 different times. So you get more than 1 million children singing the same song together, and the sun goes ah. Why does the sun go, ah, when a million children sing the same song? Do you have a guess? See, the sun went to a lot of trouble to cook up this here DNA, Anu, the sun. And when are we going to grow up and become stars? Hello. Every shaman knows that the heart of the sun is cool and inviting. It's not hot. It is, in fact, an eyeball. And it's really the only way out of here. Sun God, see through that eyeball, as we're. So when Enki says, I designed the DNA so that it could implode, and therefore it has the potential to be the twinkling of a million
uses the
stars.
pathways between the stars to bring souls into matter,
Yes.
into a body.
Yes. And
Pathways between the stars.
pathway. And when Gurdjieff says planets and stars experience gravity relations erotically, what he meant was that nodal longitudinal array, which is the mechanism of gravity waves. It's the physics of astrology. It's where we go when we die. It's Aboriginal songline dreaming track. It's ancestor memory. It's access to that array. And we need to begin to understand that coherent longitudinal interferometry as electrical engineers in order to intelligently grow up and become part of Elena's ET community. End of lecture. And that was a happily ever after, I hope.
Oh, that was amazing, amazing. So much fun. And I want to add to that, to the last things you were saying, that I remember before coming here, how I incarnated into my body. And I didn't know what exactly it was until Ia recently reminded it to me. Is I have this memory where I walk in a glass tube, there's the stars around me, and there's a green vortex ahead of me, and I need to wait for the right alignment between stars. There's a route, like a map.
Exactly.
It needs to be aligned in the right position to fall in the right body at the right time on the right planet.
And the right vortex.
I go.
The right vortex, the right alignment, the right tube, the right longitudinal array, that embedding. The thing is, we talked about those things mystically before, but to talk about them as serious electrical engineers takes us to another level. But I stand in awe of your ability to hold that memory, Elena, because I don't think my birth was quite that coherent. I'm getting there, but
it needs to be coherent for it to work. So that, so
yeah.
obviously.
And we can design generations of children to have that kind of coherence when we plan births and deaths wisely. That in Druid, I believe you would have the ancestors present at the moment of conception, in fact. And what that increased attention did, compression to access to the memory nodes of ancestral memory in the array. Ancestral memory was Aboriginal name for God. What does that mean? That's the array. Everything you do about your day was about accessing that array.
Yeah, and you are the singularity that moves through time. And when we invoke in the Druid ceremony, the tree of life that comes from the ground and that holds the three different realms, it's the phase conjugation. You have the earth, the present, the singularity, and the sky, the three realms.
Yes. It's wonderful. We have a 3D animation I won't bring, but goldenmean.info/says tree of life. You see, if you animate the tetra, the cube, the dodeca, and they land, the shadow is the tree of life. Hello.
There we go. There we go. That's Yggdrasil.
Yes.
That's the, and yeah, I was told by actually my grandmother, who was from the island of Gotland. She trained me in shamanism, and she was from the Sami and Norse traditions melt together on Gotland. Is very specific. And one day she told me, oh no, the tree of life. I was young, it's not a real thing, a physical thing. It's within you. It's within every cell of your body. It's within your DNA. That's the tree of life, and you can access it from yourself. That's why, that's how it works.
Yeah, it's literally the implosive map to charge collapse. Not only is it in the atom, but it's in your heart, in your DNA. And where you access that charge collapse implosion, you access the array, and that's the DNA radio. That's Druid. That's beautiful. And you've made that practical, Elena. Thank you.
And you explained it with science. Now it's time that we merge together
exactly
the science with a
That's
big
right.
S,
Serious
because
science.
we've been the enemies of humanity have split all the disciplines for us never to find out.
Yes.
When we come all together, the science with a big S, the
Yes.
actually,
And
Kundalini.
And we call it the serious science of soul. But if we actually understood that the longitudinal coherence of the aura of our children is their only chance at taking memory through death, the real physics of soul, which is actually the physics of bliss, once governments understand that, then governments will not be soulless. They won't make decisions that take away the souls of your kids when they understand that that is measurable. Suddenly, you don't want to put your kid in a metal building with electrosmog because their aura is not going to have that coherence. We need to know what's sacred space and teach our kids.
Yeah, and they all like this all the time.
Oh, yeah. And instead of learning to do bliss ritual, in fact, the Aboriginals, they knew, as we joked before, the definition of culture is whether you can teach your young people to have a bliss experience. And it isn't the color of the beer and the shoe polish. No, it's, do you have the skill to teach your young people what bliss is? Because that's their doorway to soul and the future. Yes. Exactly.
Oh, well said. That was beautiful.
Well, Elena, you're very good at becoming a shareable wave. Thank you for making this possible.
Well, I think it's great when we work all together and we bring all of this for everyone else. And I am really grateful to you, Dan, for all that you do to help me. But through me, it's not me, it's about the information that I'm bringing. And this is such great support and corroboration. And I have no words. It's beyond grateful that I feel. So thank you.
We're going to plan more fun together. This is too much fun.
Each of these slides that you presented worth a video in itself. So we're more fun.
We're going to have more fun. It's all good. And it's going to be blissful being together, kids. Let's do this together out there,
Yes.
All right.
Unity.
Thank you. Thank you, dear.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much.
And a blessing. Thank you.
Blessings.
I honor the twinkle in your star.